Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Excellencies, Venerables, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. 我们在座的各位来自海内外的大德，还有来自我们多个国家和地区的领导，在座的各位来自不同信仰的朋友、嘉宾、女士们、先生们。那么今天我借这半个小时的时间，我用英语发言。那么今天呢，主要呢，我将会针对这样的一个议题来发言，那就是呢，我们如何能够呢，古为今用啊？古为今用呢，所指的就是我们古代的智慧，尤其是我所熟悉的中华智慧，如何能够呢，用在当前这么一个我们觉得是危机四伏、具有考验性的年代。So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take this opportunity to congratulate our hosts on your successful hosting of such an event, which I would call a landmark event. Now, in conjunction with the founding of such a forum, such a standing committee for the forum, and today I have to fully utilize the 30 minutes allocation given to me to speak on the relevance of ancient wisdom in resolving contemporary quagmire. Ladies and gentlemen, lately we have been talking about the world is in chaos. We, the humanity, is now grappling with a multidimensional litany of existential challenges amid a waning global governance. The conventional Western-centric dictates that have been serving the geopolitical purposes of the West over the past 7 decades have now come to a bottleneck. The evolving dynamism and paradigm have dawned upon us that the changing world could never be the same as before. Truly, this is not an overstatement, but rather this reflects the hard facts of life we are facing now. And all nation states, the reigning hegemon included, must learn to live with the new reality of a multipolar world where embracing diversity with inclusivity is the evolving order of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, the impact that it brought along upon the prevailing global order is unprecedented. The West supremacy and the accompanying deeply rooted exceptionalism are now openly contested. Normative condescension by the old colonial powers of the West to their former colonies in the developing world is increasingly challenged. The Global South's growing disillusionment with the current international order can no longer be concealed. And in an evolving alternative order of the world of multipolarity is now in the making. Ladies and gentlemen, while the catchphrase embracing diversity is resonating across the world, the harmonizing of diverse cultures remains a daunting task ahead. The spirit of cultural inclusivity that allows for coexistence and harmonizing of diverse cultures is the prerequisite for intercultural tolerance, interaction, appreciation, and mutual learning. It applies to the governance of any nation state, characterized by plurality of ethnicity, cultures, and religions, like Malaysia and Singapore. On the macro scale, ladies and gentlemen, more complexities are making the global governance even more challenging than ever before. Amid the evolving paradigm and dynamism that are all set to reshape the global order, the emergence of any public goods to the humanity in the interest of global governance should be sensibly embraced instead of taking it as a hostile bid to usurp the primacy of the reigning hegemonic power. From the perspective of Cold War mentality, decline of the West's dominance would only give rise to the antagonistic authoritarianism. But in reality, ladies and gentlemen, the pressing concerns before us now are the rising common challenges that are putting our survival, our very survival at stake. Spectrum of exigencies ranging from food and energy insecurities to climate change, alongside global health emergencies, are sufficient to command our solidarity and coordinated cooperation, irrespective of colors, creed, religion, and polity. Noting that the West has long been taking pride of the shared values in Western democracy and human rights, but their model remains alien to many developing countries in the global South, which practically have little or no say at all in the global governance, perhaps in pursuit of a more equitable mode of global order. The new common denominator that can help bind the world together is none other than the element of inclusivity. And this appears to be a more viable choice of alternative underpinning the evolving global order. Ladies and gentlemen, time and again, lessons of governance across the developing world have dawned upon us that the models of democracy and the upholding of human rights are inseparable from the respective civilizational norms and societal priorities that vary across the world. There is no single model or benchmark that fits all nations. The coercive imposition of any model on others, particularly the vulnerable, developing, and the least developed nations, irrespective of the local social conditions, is by itself hegemonic in nature. Ladies and gentlemen, worse still, weaponization of democracy and human rights through regime change by the major powers with military might had only humanitarian disasters to offer in many past incidents, in many past instances. It is a flagrant disregard for human rights of the highest order, largely blinkered by the perpetrators' hegemonic greed and arrogance. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, some of us here might be quick to put the blame on their DNA, which I don't have the answer. Ladies and gentlemen, while the ethnic Chinese worldwide are still in the mood of celebrating the Moon Festival or the Mid-Autumn Festival, I could hardly resist the temptation to resurrect the Chinese civilizational wisdom of harmony in diversity, which allows coexistence, harmonizing, and mutual learning of diverse cultures. It is an all-embracing choice beyond sheer inclusivity that has been time proven. The constructive engagement entailed in the inherited wisdom has over the ages been enriching this civilization, and it is now an emerging choice of alternative on the horizon of global governance. Strictly speaking, ladies and gentlemen, the new inclusive and mutually engaging paradigm that accommodates diverse civilization is no Chinese template or model, much less an exportable model that is to be imposed upon others. The logic is rather simple. Chinese philosophical thoughts like harmony in diversity and forging cooperation and harmony for all nations, or in Chinese we call that 协和万邦, encapsulate the ideal of oneness for humanity and not any form of China-centric dominance or hegemony. Be that as it may, ladies and gentlemen, the entrenched spot that inclusiveness holds in Chinese philosophy, I presume, may still remain less comprehensible to the followers and practitioners of the Manifest Destiny doctrine. The latter provides fertile ground for breeding colonialism, expansionism, imperialism, and neocolonialism, all of which are predatory in nature, leaving no room for collective interest for mankind. In the context of the prevailing world scenario, ladies and gentlemen, shared destiny of humanity has now been growing more pronounced than ever before in the face of mounting challenges that command concerted efforts to mitigate. In this perspective, ladies and gentlemen, resurrection of the old specter of Cold War in the name of crusading for democracy is certainly not the viable option for humanity. It is no solution to the quagmire confronting humanity, but would only help rekindle the various flashpoints across the world, thus pushing the globe to the edge of Armageddon. Parallel to this, neither is the pluralistic world destined to embark on a trajectory of clash of civilization, as was contended by the late Samuel Huntington. He argued in his thesis that people's cultural and religious identities would be the primary sources of conflict in the post-Cold War world, when the ages of ideology has come to an end. Since time immemorial, ladies and gentlemen, emergence of diverse civilizations has never been a zero-sum game. No doubt, our history has been punctuated with religious conflicts at different times of history in the name of religions. Yet, in essence, the warring parties were driven to conflicts by sheer religious bigotry. I repeat, by sheer religious bigotry, and not by the religious teachings itself. That makes a difference. Against the present backdrop of rising geopolitical tension, ladies and gentlemen, the theory of clash of civilization would only become a self-fulfilling prophecy if the global hegemon is going hell-bent to stoke the conflicts along the religious and cultural seams in defense of its global leadership and hegemonic primacy. And all this could be avoided if the state actors across the world have come to their senses with a better understanding of the inclusivity-centric model of global governance. The ancient philosophical wisdom of China deserves to be better understood and better interpreted in the contemporary context with comprehensible narrative in multiple languages and not based on literary translations per se. Ladies and gentlemen, whenever we talk about translation, of course, you and I are fully aware that along the way, when we translate certain philosophical thoughts from one language to another, we are bound to face such a hiccup, such a challenge. That is, we can get it done beautifully in accordance with the literal meaning, but we may fail to appreciate the real essence of the philosophical thoughts, particularly the norms that are entailed in it. And after all, it is the understanding of the respective civilizational norms that matters. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to keep you bored or occupied for too long a time, but today, certainly this is what I have to say and what I have to share with you. Thank you so much.